Anki's Boris Sofman.
All right, so we are going to talk about robots, but first we're going to do something a little bit fun, hopefully. So who here remembers Taco Copter? Okay, a few people, apparently not that many. But the problem with Taco Copter, right, is that it doesn't exist. It's just a dream. Until today, which Christian Sanz from Skycatch is going to show us, right? Okay, it's fine. Are we getting video? Oh, here it comes. Slightly terrified. I think that's worth some applause. Now that the tough part is out of the way, you must feel a little relieved. I think, so what we're going to talk about are not everyone probably has an idea in their head about a robot from science fiction, like C-3PO, the Jetsons made something like that. That is not what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about robots who don't look like their traditional robots, that might even be a thermostat, but actually are doing, at least these guys are going to make the case that they're actually doing a lot of interesting work with robotics. But maybe we'll just start with those science fictional robots and have each of you tell us your favorite robot, starting with Rob.
Yeah, my favorite robot is Kit, the Knight Industries 2000 from Knight Rider.
Ordinary Oliver from the Foundation series by the Gaston.
Oh, I'm going to applaud that. Well done.
Mine is C-3PO.
I gotta go with Wally. Such good personality.
So Rob, you actually helped us develop the idea for this panel, and I think it gave us some ideas for ways to think about robotics that aren't what we would normally think about. What do you think on the other side is sort of the boundary between what makes a robot versus some other kind of hardware?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, a lot of people think of robotics as almost humanoid robots that can move around. The definition that I think of and we think of at Shasta is something that can sense your surroundings. It learns from the information that it gets in and then it acts. But the device can be absolutely anything. So think of almost like an enchanted object, and that's what I think of as a robot.
An enchanted object.
An enchanted object.
I was not assuming that's a good answer. Okay, so I think with that definition in mind, I think we're going to ask the other three guys to convince us that what they're working on is a robot, or at least has robot-like qualities. I think this will be easier for some than others. Maybe we'll start with Boris.
Yeah. So, like Rob said, robotics is about making physical things come to life and using software to define them to do very fascinating things the way you would expect on the software side. And for us, we're starting with entertainment. It's a fantastic place to start, and we are making physical characters understand their surroundings. They react to each other, they understand what they're doing, they have a personality, and they come to life to make experiences possible in the physical world that had never been possible before. And with Anki Drive, that's our first incarnation of this technology in people's living rooms.
Christian?
For us, it's a little bit different because we have a different type of challenge, which is gravity, right? So we build UAVs and make them as close as possible to a helicopter with a pilot in it, but without the human in it. So a lot of the work that we put in is software to make these guys really smart to sense and avoid, go to certain locations, do things, come back, completely autonomous.
All right, Matt.
So, when you're going to build a device that's intelligent, where does that intelligence come from? And for us, that comes from a deep understanding of machine learning. So from the beginning of Nest, we knew we had to build a basic robot, a machine that would learn from you and that would adapt to its environment. So we actually built a team like we would have done in a robotics company. We actually hired a lot of our old colleagues from Coneybeer, and one of them being my professor. We hired a robotics team to build a thermostat because we knew that intelligence had been kind of in the DNA of the company.
And so, Matt, when you were recruiting people, and you said, and these guys were experts in robotics, was it a hard sell to get them to work on a thermostat?
It actually was a really easy sell. So once you hear the idea, like do a thermostat, first you think I'm nuts. and then after we start talking about it, you realize how big the problem is. Everyone has one. Every single home has never been replaced in 20 years. They're wasting energy, horrible design issues, no usability. It becomes a pretty obvious problem. And for roboticists, there's the added challenge of sensors, human occupancy patterns, environment changes. It's really hard problems.
So I assume you have one or multiple Nest thermometers at home?
I do. I have one in the Nest in my house.
Just to sort of boil down kind of what the value proposition is, how would you say, having that at home has changed your home life?
So for me, I don't need to worry about what my home is doing when I'm away. So when I leave, I'm confident that the temperature is going to turn down. It's not running my AC all day. So if I go out for a business trip or I'm at the office, it turns down automatically. Fortunately, in California, the weather is really mild, but for the rest of the country, that is an enormous problem. They waste a ton of energy that way.
Christian, so let's talk a little bit about drones. Did you feel pretty confident when it started coming over that everything was going to go smoothly?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%.
Well,
I was a little nervous. There's a lot of people here, so
that would have been really awkward. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about, you talked a little bit about what Skycatch is doing, but maybe talk about how what Skycatch is doing is different from other drone companies.
Absolutely. So we're very different in the sense that we focus on working with really large companies and scaling their UAV implementations. Rather than having someone just with the remote control in a location gathering information, we can deploy hundreds of thousands of these units, extracting information and sending it into a single location. And we use it all using very high-tech technology for keeping a drone in the air on an ongoing basis.
And you're mostly building this for industrial use?
That's correct. We're focusing on companies that are in the areas of construction, mining, agriculture, logistics, like UPS, FedEx, all those companies, and energy, like wind turbines, solar panels. That's basically the range that we work with.
So let me ask you maybe a slightly tougher question that wasn't in the prepared statement, but somebody tweeted at me, and I'd be interested in getting other people's take on this too, is as these move into an industrial context, do you think they're going to put people out of work?
I think personally it's going to augment our ability to make better decisions. Not necessarily replace people, but for instance, we did a test up in Napa Valley with UC Davis, and we had a farmer there, and he was very skeptical about this. And in fact, he was like, I'm not going to use this. I can walk the farms myself. And when he finally got him to test it out, got some goggles on, his reaction was like almost like a little kid. He was like, oh my God, I can see everything. We saw everything, but we didn't know anything about farming. He knew everything about farming. He was able to make decisions right away.
So do you think that's going to be sort of universally true, or it's going to be like exactly how it fits into the existing workforce is going to change depending on the industry?
Yeah, this is a whole new data set. We never had this data set before, just like before we never had Google Maps. This is like one of my guys, Will Pryor, from one of our team members says, this is Google Maps, but in real time and more high def. Imagine being able to actually have visibility on everything that you do in logistical areas like construction, for management, security, for fulfilling resources when you run out of sand or panels. You're able to move really quickly without having to call people. Using the phone and calling people or just finding out maybe they're busy, you can act to it really quickly.
What about you, Boris? So I imagine the initial Anki derived product is not competitive with human labor or parenting, but I know that there's sort of a bigger vision, which we can talk about in a second. But I'm curious, do you think that there's a potential sort of competition in terms of, from a labor perspective?
Well, a lot of robotics is actually additive. It's not that somebody was, people have been playing with toys and games forever. It's just that now we're making the first video game in the real world. That's something that doesn't replace somebody, it just makes your experiences better. And so a lot of technology is not necessarily a one-to-one replacement of humans. It just makes the overall efficiency much, much higher.
So you talked a little bit about the technology already, but so you were on stage at Apple's last big event, WWDC, and how many people saw that? The cool race cars? Again, a few. But it looks, I think at first it just was like, oh, these guys are like, race cars, whatever. I think there's a little bit more going on behind the scenes. Can you tell us a little bit about what was actually happening?
So for us, right now, is the tip of the iceberg in consumer robotics. Robotics has been around for several decades. It's always been focused on agriculture, industrial, defense space. This is the first time when people can actually start expecting these technologies to come into their lives and have a really big impact. And so We are making all of our robots, they're engineered to think. And what I mean by that is they truly understand where they are, they understand their environment, they have a personality, they behave in a way you would not expect a physical character to behave. And so with Anki Drive, that was, in some sense, our Trojan horse in introducing people to these types of technologies and what they should expect from physical things. But the approaches carry over to almost every aspect of their daily life.
So are you building self-driving cars eventually?
It's well, the funny thing is that well, we do have self-driving cars. They're just in your living room. But you know, a lot of the sort of projects that we think of as the holy grail of robotics, the autonomous vehicle, the humanoid robot, you know, that's like a 10, 15, 20-year goal, and we're approaching it from the bottoms up, where you make the most amazing application of robotics functionality you can make today, and you use that as a stepping stone to do more and more advanced things that get you to those goals down the road.
One of the things you also mentioned was sort of giving each of these devices a personality. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of personality they have and how you give it to them?
Sure. So in the context of Anki Drive that you saw on stage, each of those cards has a role. One of them was aggressive. It was trying to get through. It was trying to get ahead, and so it behaved in the way you would expect that character to behave. And that's something that you take for granted in a video game, but when you see it physically happening in front of you and something that shouldn't have that sort of intelligence, it's really surprising. Another character might be more sneaky, more defensive. Another one might just be trying to avoid the skirmish entirely and be very, very pacifist. And so all of this becomes gives us the ability to literally program these personalities the same way you would do so with a video game character on a virtual side, except it's with a physical object in front of you.
So let's step back for a second from the specific companies. Rob, you've invested in Nest and some other companies that could consider robotics companies. Could you maybe talk about what you think sort of connects them and what you're looking for in an investment?
Yeah, so one of the things we look at is where there's something new that's happening or has happened in the technology that enables a new set of capabilities, and often that follows Moore's law. Could be more horsepower in the CPU, could be just more and more wireless connectivity, etc. But most importantly, we look for things that can get better with time. So when you look at Nest, or you look at Anki, in fact, you look at all three of these companies, they push out software upgrades to their hardware regularly. So what ends up happening is really just like a baseball glove that we all had that actually got better the longer you have it. The longer you have a Nest device, the longer you have an Anki car, because of these updates and because of the machine learning, the device gets better with time, and that's a new relationship for people to have with these things. And that's something that we look for when we think about robotics-related companies.
Mm-hmm. So what does that do for ideas, like the idea of planned obsolescence? Like, am I going to have a Nest and I just never have to replace it?
Well, one of the things that happens, and this could be a Nest, it could be Anki, it could be Sonos. You take a look at the speakers that are in your house. What ends up happening is, instead of going to a given customer and saying they're going to become a repeat customer, you start to think of customers as people that are advocates for your product. So for the first time in history, you start to have hardware and robotics companies where products become they get higher net promoter scores with time. So that means that the longer somebody has a Nest thermostat, or the longer that somebody has a drone, the more they like it, the more likely they are to advocate to their friends and colleagues that they purchase something.
Matt, is that how you guys
That's exactly how we think about it. So
that's good, since he invested, you guys are on the same
indeed,
page.
we're on the same page. Yes. So we think about our relationship with our customer in terms of a very long-term relationship. So one, we deliver software updates for free, and that's an unknown thing for thermostats. And I think when we first started, that never really on the internet to get an update to begin with. The way we think about things is the product should get better with time. You should love it more and more as time goes on, and you should tell your friends about it because it's so awesome. And that propels us forward. Like as a small company, as a growing company, that's the most valuable thing, is that word of mouth. I don't really worry about planned obsolescence. I mean, as a growing company, we should also have new products and new services to get people to buy new cool things that they didn't have before.
So, another thing I wanted to go back to, you guys were talking a little bit about being, coming from an academic background in robotics. And Boris, one of the things we talked about before was sort of the challenges of going from a university setting to actually a for-profit company. I mean, can you talk a little bit about what you've learned doing that?
Well, when you're in a university setting, it's totally okay to use a $500,000 robot with $80,000 sensors and 8 quad-core CPUs in the back to navigate very, very intelligently. When you want to make a product in consumer robotics that people can afford and use, you have to be very, very clever on how you use how you use very clever combinations of components, sensors, computation, and do things at a much lower price point than anything that would be possible otherwise.
Matt, is that something you've struggled with too?
Oh man, so we had to fit like 7 sensors, 2 wireless radios in a package that's like this big, and it has to be able to run for years and not require external power. And that's not something that you have to do in research. In research, like the constraints are off. Your goal is to publish.
It's all about performance.
Yeah, and this is very much the opposite. Like heavily constrained, shipping.
And you also mentioned, hiring a bunch of, academic people with an academic background to work with. Did you have to sort of yell at them for a while to get them to do that?
So, a little bit. So the way we structured Nest actually is we have kind of our technology research team, which Yogi runs, and she works with an engineering team that implements those cool ideas. So they come up with these MATLAB models and all these crazy algorithms, and then we have guys who know how to ship it.
We have to yell at ourselves even to get out of the mindset of what we're used to in graduate school. It's a very, very different problem, but it's one of the exciting aspects because the roots are actually the same. The algorithms that we're using are ones that only made sense in an academic setting years ago, but now we're actually finding a really great place in consumer products.
It's the same thing with UAVs actually. A lot of the YouTube videos that you see, tech videos, you see a lot of these autonomous drones flying together and doing different figure eights and things like that. A lot of that, the infrastructure to do that is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Vicom cameras everywhere. You can't really replicate that into the commercial world. So our challenge is not using all those Vicom cameras and actually be completely autonomous, and then stuffing all that software into a small little board. So it becomes a lot more challenging.
Have you guys succeeded in doing that, or is that still a little ways off?
We've succeeded at doing a lot of the computer vision algorithms to keep the drone completely autonomous. I mean, you saw it. I haven't made it public yet, but you saw it completely autonomous. Following a laser, for instance.
Right. And just to be clear, what we saw was this was piloted. This was more just kind of a fun thing, not
That's
necessarily
exactly
a demo of the technology. But the goal is to make it autonomous.
That's exactly right. So for instance, we have an experiment at the office of a drone following a laser, finding a beacon, and utilizing computer vision within the board to actually guide itself without having any aid from the outside. And that's really challenging. Computer vision guy trying to, further refine the algorithm so it's not using too much RAM. It's really, the embedded system guy fighting with the computer vision guy it's really challenging.
So Rob, maybe we can talk about that same issue from the investor perspective, and to what extent when someone first comes in to pitch you, you're thinking about sort of their cost structure.
Well, one of the things that we can find pretty quickly when somebody comes in is not just the cost structure, but how much do they love the product and how much do they understand their customer. And typically for a customer, they want something that's inexpensive and reliable. So we take a look and we try to figure out pretty quickly, is this somebody who understands their customer? I know that's kind of not directly to the question you're asking, but that's the first thing that we think about.
Right. And then is cost one of the second or third?
Oh, it's critical. That's a tipping point for all this, because if for a consumer application, we look at enterprise robotics applications as well, but for a consumer application, it means that you need to get down to the landing cost or bill of materials. It's down around $30 or $40 for a lot of breakthrough applications, maybe higher if it's higher value add, but we're talking about something that's very, very expensive.
And right now, you mentioned enterprise and consumer. Are you sort of looking at them equally or emphasizing one over the other?
Well, we look at them both. So if you think about some of the things that are going on in and around drones right now, a lot of those applications may be around monitoring, could be around applying fertilizer, could be around surveillance. Those can support higher price points, significantly higher price points.
So Matt, one of the things I wanted to talk about was stuff breaking. And I think people see Nest as sort of symbolic of this sort of broader movement towards the smart home, but you can sort of have these nightmares about everything starting to malfunction and nothing in your house. Suddenly your house is betraying you. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so we put a lot of thought into this as well. So especially when you do with automation, and we talk about it in the context of robotics, Nest will do a lot of things for you. but we also have to keep you in control. And that's actually one of the things that we've built in kind of from the beginning, is if we're gonna do things like automated demand response and peak energy times, the user has to still be in control. And we always have to give that control to them and be really transparent about it. And I think one of the things that's very counter to how machine learning usually works is we have to be transparent. We have to show how the machine is moving from you and why.
Right, so maybe a more generalizable way of looking at that is that these devices have to have sort of a way where you can sort of basically turn off the automation.
Exactly.
Christian, how do you look at that in the drone space and in the industrial space? Have you had like crashes and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you have to think that once you're up in the air, something goes wrong, you just go down, right? So redundancy is one of the things that we're tackling right now, like having multiple drivers for the motors. So if one goes down, we got the other one waiting for it. But it just gets a lot more complex when you're up in the air. You have gravity pushing you down, and then all sorts of different conditions. It makes it a lot more difficult. Yeah.
What about you, Boris? How did you deal with sort of struggling with, just being on stage at Apple?
It was that was an honor. It was an amazing experience, and for us, that was our first kind of coming out party where we've been working on this for over 5 years, but I think we have a lot of the same challenges that these guys have, where we're fundamentally we sell hardware that is very much defined by the software that runs on it, but you have to define it in a way that is very robust, it's capable, and it'll give you all the capabilities you need for a long time, so that then you have ultimate flexibility on the software side to really expand the experience over time and keep it very enjoyable, very entertaining, and very interesting, so that the hardware never becomes the bottleneck. And a lot of that goes into the original design, and so being able to do that up front when you can't predict all the things you want to do in software, that becomes one of the most interesting challenges in the whole process.
So maybe this is kind of related to things breaking and failure, but Christian, I know you're also doing some work around standards around drones.
Yes.
What can you maybe tell us, what do you think is going to be the biggest issue in terms of society, if there's suddenly all these things in the air?
Well, we believe that all of this infrastructure needs to be regulated, but no one really has stepped forward and built something or put something in place to allow us to regulate. That's why I'm working with DaireCodeOfEthics.org, which is an organization that basically strives at separating the drone companies that are actually doing things for good and the people that are actually doing things for bad. And then we're also working with airhighway.org. These guys are basically building blueprints of what an interstate highway would look like, and having drones delivering things, dropping pickups, stations, how to use that also to lift up the economy in the city, with registration, toll pricing, and all of that.
So you talk about using drones for good and for bad. Can you talk a little bit about where you see the dividing line, and also as a technology provider, how much control you're going to have over that?
I think a lot of it has to do with the technology, the infrastructure we put into place. And obviously, our interest in being involved with air highways is for us to be the ones who put the technology in place for them as well. And that has to do with transponders. Every time something goes up, we know about it, right? So if something is up and no one knows about it, it gets shut down somehow. A radio wave that basically makes it go to a different direction. These are all things that you can do at some point, but the infrastructure needs to be in place.
So I think we're basically running out of time, but sort of one last lightning round question, which will start with Rob, which is that 10 years from now, what is one thing that humans do that will be done primarily by robots?
Self-driving cars.
Take care of their home.
Installing thermometers with drones. Thermostats.
All aspects of entertainment, I think, are going to have a much higher level of intelligence than they have today.
Cool. Well, thanks guys for joining us.